Hello, beautiful souls and story lovers. Tonight, we take you on a journey where hearts are tested, destinies collide, and every choice could change everything. Secrets will surface, love will be challenged, and a twist awaits that you'll never forget. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, like this video if it moves your heart, subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and share it with someone who believes in true love. Are you ready? Let's dive in. The scent of wilted roses drifted through the marble corridors of the Blackwood mansion, their petals scattered like dried blood across the pristine floors. Elena Maroro pressed her trembling fingers against the cold brass handle of Dante's office door, the weight of her family's destruction crushing down on her shoulders like a tombstone. At 23, she had imagined her life unfolding like poetry written in sunlight. Instead, she stood at the threshold of hell, about to sell her soul to the devil himself. The mahogany doors swung open with a whisper, revealing Dante Blackwood behind his fortress of a desk. At 32, he was carved from shadows and sharp edges, his midnight blue eyes lifting from legal documents to assess her like a predator studying prey. The late afternoon sun streamed through towering windows, casting his face in plains of light and darkness. Miss Maroro. His voice carried the weight of empires, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous. Punctual. I appreciate that in business partners. Elena's green eyes flashed with defiance even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard the whispers about Dante Blackwood, how he built his fortune on the bones of broken rivals, how mercy was a word absent from his vocabulary. You know why I'm here, she said, forcing steel into her voice despite the storm raging inside her chest. Dante leaned back, fingers steepled like a cathedral of bone and sinew. Indeed. Your father's debt. 2.3 million, to be precise. Accrued through gambling and investments that would make a fool blush. The number hit her like a physical blow. Elena gripped the leather chair's arm, her knuckles white as winter. But I'm not interested in discussing his failures, Dante continued, something flickering in his eyes that might have been amusement. I'm here to offer a solution. What kind of solution? The words scraped from her throat like broken glass. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, cold as marble. Marriage. To me. 1 year, contractual, no emotional obligations required. In exchange, your family's debt vanishes like smoke. The world tilted beneath Elena's feet. Marriage to this stranger, this ice-blooded tycoon who collected broken dreams like trophies. She was still untouched, her heart guarded by fantasies of true love, not this calculated transaction. You can't be serious, she spat, heat flooding her cheeks. I'm not a commodity to be traded. Refuse, and your father faces bankruptcy proceedings. Possibly prison. Dante's voice remained level, but his gaze sharpened like a blade finding its mark. Accept, and you gain not just their salvation, but a year of luxury. Think of it as an investment. Elena searched his face for cracks in the facade, finding only granite determination. Yet something in the way he watched her suggested depths beneath the ruthless surface, currents she couldn't read. Her family's faces flashed through her mind. Her aging parents. Her younger siblings. All of them depending on her sacrifice. 1 year, she whispered, the words tasting like ash and roses. Precisely. He slid a contract across the desk, and when she reached for it, their fingers brushed. The contact sent unexpected fire racing up her arm, warm against the chill of the room. Dante's hand lingered a heartbeat too long, his thumb grazing her skin before withdrawing. The touch was electric, dangerous, leaving her more unsettled than his threats ever could. She signed with a flourish that belied the earthquake in her soul. As she rose to leave, Dante stood, towering over her with quiet, predatory grace. Welcome to your new life, Elena. Her name on his lips sounded like both a promise and a warning. Outside, the Tuscan sun painted the hills in shades of amber and blood. Elena walked the gardens where wilted roses clung to thorny stems, their scent following her like an omen. She had entered as a free woman. She left bound to a man whose heart seemed carved from the same cold marble as his home. But in that brief, burning touch, she wondered if there was something more to Dante Blackwood than the ruthless mask he wore. The conflict was set. A marriage of convenience that promised salvation but threatened to destroy her very soul. What she didn't know was that some devils wore angel faces, and some angels carried the deepest scars of all. The Blackwood mansion swallowed Elena whole, its marble halls echoing with the hollow click of her heels like a funeral march. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across polished floors, but their beauty felt as cold and distant as the man who owned them. 7 days since she'd signed her life away. 7 nights sleeping in a suite that felt more like a gilded cage than sanctuary. The wedding loomed 3 days ahead, and Elena clutched her mother's silver locket like a lifeline, its etched rose pattern worn smooth from years of nervous fingering. She found Dante in the library that evening, firelight dancing across his sharp features as he reviewed documents. Amber liquid glowed in a crystal glass at his elbow, and leather-bound books surrounded him like silent sentinels. "I'm not a doll to be dressed up and displayed," Elena announced from the doorway, arms crossed in defiance. The charity gala invitation crumpled in her fist. Dante looked up, his midnight blue eyes unreadable. "No one said you were. But appearances matter in my world. You'll attend. And you'll smile." He rose and crossed the room with predatory grace, stopping closer than necessary. His fingers brushed the locket in her hand, the touch sending unexpected warmth spiraling through her chest. "This is lovely," he murmured, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Old, but cherished." Elena jerked back, startled by the gentleness in his tone. "It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her dreams for me." The admission slipped out raw and unguarded, and she regretted it instantly. Something flickered in Dante's eyes, there and gone like lightning. "Wear it to the gala," he said, turning back to his desk. "It'll remind you who you're doing this for." The Palazzo Medici gleamed with Florence's elite, champagne flutes catching light like liquid diamonds. Elena felt like a fraud in borrowed silk, Dante's arm a steady anchor as they navigated the crowd of jackals in evening wear. When a drunk socialite spilled wine across her gown, Dante's reaction was swift and protective. He guided her to a quiet alcove, producing a silk handkerchief embroidered with a single rose. "Here," he said, voice low as he dabbed at the crimson stain himself. His fingers grazed her arm, and the intensity in his eyes when they met hers made her breath catch. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, confused by the tender gesture from a man who claimed to feel nothing. "It's nothing," he replied, but his hand lingered before distance snapped back between them like a broken wire. On the drive home, rain lashed the windows of his midnight Maserati. Elena stared at her reflection in the glass, the locket warm against her throat. "Why do you really need a wife?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Business requires certain appearances. Stability. Trustworthiness. That's not what I asked." Silence stretched taut as piano wire. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, because some ghosts require witnesses to finally rest. Elena turned to study his profile, carved in marble and shadows. What ghosts? But he said nothing more, and the mansion's gates swung open to welcome them back to their prison of roses and secrets. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered the conservatory where jasmine bloomed thick and sweet, a stark contrast to the dying roses outside. Through the glass walls, she saw a figure in the gardens, kneeling beside a marble headstone she hadn't noticed before, Dante. His shoulders shook with silent grief, one hand pressed against the cold stone, the other clutching a single white rose. Elena pressed closer to the window, her heart suddenly aching for this broken man who hid his pain behind walls of ice and control. Whatever ghosts haunted Dante Blackwood, they ran deeper than business, deeper than money, they ran to the very marrow of his bones. As if sensing her presence, Dante's head turned toward the conservatory. Their eyes met through the glass, his face a mask of raw Vulnerability before shuttering closed again. He rose and walked away, leaving the white rose on the grave like a prayer for the dead. Elena's hand found her locket, her mother's dreams heavy in her palm. Tomorrow was the final dress fitting. In 3 days, she would marry a man haunted by ghosts she couldn't name. But as she watched Dante disappear into shadows, Elena realized she wasn't the only prisoner in this house of secrets and dying roses. The chapel bells of San Lorenzo echoed across Florence like the tolling of Elena's funeral. She stood before an ornate mirror in ivory silk and Venetian lace, the wedding dress a beautiful lie wrapped around her trembling frame. The locket rested against her throat, its familiar weight the only thing keeping her tethered to who she used to be. "You look radiant, Signorina," whispered the elderly seamstress, but Elena saw the pity in her eyes. Everyone knew this wasn't a love match. It was a transaction dressed in white satin and promises as fragile as spun glass. Through the cathedral's towering doors, Florence's elite waited like vultures at a feast. Elena walked down the endless aisle alone, her father too ashamed to give her away to the man who owned his debts. Each step echoed like a heartbeat against marble floors worn smooth by centuries of prayers and tears. Dante waited at the altar in charcoal perfection, his midnight blue eyes unreadable as she approached. But when she reached him, she saw something flicker beneath the surface. Recognition, perhaps. Or something dangerously close to actual emotion. "You came," he murmured, so softly only she could hear. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Elena whispered back, slipping her trembling hand into his offered one. "I hoped," he said, and the admission hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. The ceremony blurred together in Latin prayers and golden light. When Dante lifted her veil, his touch was reverent, almost gentle. Their lips met in a kiss that was supposed to be meaningless, contractual, but something sparked between them like struck flint. Elena felt the world tilt, her carefully constructed walls cracking under the weight of unexpected desire. Dante's kiss deepened for just a heartbeat before he pulled away, his composure restored but his eyes burning with something that looked almost like hunger. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said against her lips, and the name sounded like both a promise and a warning. The reception at Villa Medici was a whirlwind of congratulations and champagne toasts. Elena played her part perfectly, smiling until her cheeks ached while Dante's hand remained possessively on her lower back, his touch burning through silk. But it was during the dancing that everything changed. An older woman in emerald silk approached, her smile sharp as a serpent's tooth. "Dante, darling. You didn't tell me your bride was so young. So innocent." Dante's body went rigid against Elena's. "Victoria." The woman's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Still carrying torches for the dead, I see. How utterly romantic. Though I wonder if your new wife knows about Isabel." Elena felt Dante's grip tighten painfully on her waist. The name hung in the air like poison, and suddenly she understood. The marble headstone in the garden. The white rose. The ghosts he'd spoken of. "That's enough," Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Did he tell you about his first wife, dear? How she died in that car accident while fleeing from him? How he drove her to such desperation that she chose death over another day as Mrs. Blackwood?" The ballroom spun around Elena like a kaleidoscope of horror. Dante's first wife. Dead. Running from him. The ruthless millionaire she'd married wasn't just cold, he was dangerous. Possibly murderous. Elena. Dante's voice cut through her panic, but she was already pulling away, her wedding dress a white flag of surrender as she fled through the crowd. She ran until her lungs burned, until the villa's garden swallowed her in darkness and the scent of jasmine. Behind her, she heard Dante calling her name, his footsteps pursuing her like fate itself. "Elena, stop. Let me explain." She whirled to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Explain what?" "That you're a murderer. That I've married a man who kills his wives." Dante's face was a mask of anguish in the moonlight. "It wasn't like that. Isabel was sick, Elena. Mentally ill. I tried to help her, tried to save her, but she saw enemies everywhere. Including me. So she ran from you and died. Elena's voice broke on the words. And now you've trapped another woman in the same cage. You're not trapped, Dante said, stepping closer despite her retreat. The contract is ironclad. 1 year, and you're free to go. I won't chase you the way I chased her. But Elena heard the lie in his voice, saw the desperate hunger in his eyes that said he would never let her go. Not willingly. Not alive. I want to leave, she whispered. Tonight. Now. Dante's face hardened into the marble mask she knew too well. No. You signed a contract. You'll honor it, or your family pays the price. The threat hung between them like a blade. Elena touched her locket one final time, her mother's dreams of true love dying like the roses in his garden. Then I guess we're both prisoners, she said, her voice steady despite the terror racing through her veins. As they walked back toward the villa in silence, Elena realized she hadn't just married Dante Blackwood. She'd signed her own death warrant, written in ivory silk and sealed with a kiss that tasted like goodbye. 3 months into her marriage, Elena had learned the rhythm of living with a ghost. Dante disappeared for days on business trips, leaving her alone in the marble mausoleum with only wilted roses and whispered secrets for company. When he returned, he was polite, distant, treating her like a houseguest rather than a wife. But sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, Elena caught him watching her with something that looked dangerously close to longing. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that rattled the mansion's ancient bones. Elena found Dante in his study, drunk on whiskey and memories, Isabel's photograph clutched in his white-knuckled fist. She was beautiful, Elena said softly from the doorway. Dante's head snapped up, his midnight eyes red-rimmed and haunted. Don't. She looks happy in this picture. Before whatever happened between you. You don't know anything about it. But his voice cracked like breaking ice. Elena stepped closer, her silk nightgown whispering against her legs. Then tell me. Help me understand why you're torturing yourself. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then the dam broke, and words spilled from him like blood from an open wound. I met Isabel when she was 19. Sweet, innocent, everything pure in the world. I thought I could protect her from the darkness in my life, but I was wrong. The enemies I'd made, the threats, the constant danger, it broke her mind piece by piece. Thunder crashed overhead as Dante set down the photograph with trembling hands. She started seeing conspiracies everywhere. Convinced herself I was trying to kill her, that everyone around her was an assassin. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't let me touch her. The doctor said it was paranoid schizophrenia, but I knew the truth. I had destroyed her. Elena's heart clenched with unexpected compassion. What happened the night she died? She tried to leave. Again. I followed her, trying to convince her to come home, to let me help her. But she was so afraid of me, so broken. His voice dropped to a whisper. She drove straight into the river. I pulled her out, held her while she died, and her last words were, "Please don't hurt me anymore." Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks. This wasn't the story of a monster, but of a man destroyed by his own love. Without thinking, she crossed to him and placed her hands on his shoulders. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "You couldn't have known." Dante looked up at her, his face a battlefield of pain and desperate hope. Elena. Her name on his lips was a prayer, and when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. His kiss was desperate, hungry, 3 months of denied longing pouring between them like wildfire. Elena's world tilted as she kissed him back, her walls crumbling under the weight of his need and her own treacherous heart. They made love that night on the Persian rug before his fireplace, their bodies writing poetry in whispered gasps and gentle touches. Dante worshipped her like a man finding salvation, and Elena gave herself to him completely, knowing she was falling for the very man she'd once feared. "I never expected this," Dante murmured against her throat afterward, his arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in his world. "Neither did I," Elena whispered back, her mother's locket pressed between their hearts. For 6 weeks, they lived in stolen paradise. Dante began coming home earlier, bringing her flowers from the garden, teaching her to dance in the conservatory while rain painted the glass walls. Elena watched him smile for the first time, real and unguarded, and felt her heart break a little more each day knowing it couldn't last. The end came with the arrival of a manila envelope, hand-delivered while Dante was in Rome. Elena opened it without thinking, and her world collapsed in a single photograph. Dante and Victoria, the woman from their wedding, locked in a passionate embrace outside a hotel in Milan. The timestamp showed last week. Below the photo, a note in elegant handwriting: "Some men never learn to love just one woman. Ask him about our arrangement." V. Elena's hands shook as she stared at the evidence of Dante's betrayal. While he'd been whispering promises in her ear, he'd been continuing his affair with the venomous woman who'd exposed his secrets at their wedding. When Dante returned that evening with a bouquet of white roses, Elena was waiting in the foyer, her suitcase at her feet and the photograph on the marble table between them. "Elena." His face went ashen as he saw the evidence of his deception. "How long?" Her voice was steady, carved from ice and broken dreams. "It's not what it looks like." "How long have you been sleeping with her, Dante?" He closed his eyes, the roses falling forgotten to the floor. "Since before I met you." "But Elena, I swear, nothing happened after we married. That photograph is old. The timestamp says otherwise." Elena picked up her suitcase, her mother's locket cold against her throat. "I'm leaving." "You can't. The contract said marriage for 1 year. It didn't say I had to stay in this house while you make a fool of me." She moved toward the door, but Dante blocked her path. "I love you," he said desperately. "Not her. You. This thing with Victoria, it meant nothing. It was just physical, just habit." Elena looked at the man she'd given her heart to, seeing him clearly for the first time. Beautiful and broken, but still the same selfish creature who collected women like trophies. "The tragic thing is, I almost believed you were different. I almost believed you could change." She touched his face one last time, memorizing the sharp lines she'd learned to love. "But men like you don't change, Dante. You just find new ways to hurt the people who love you." She walked away from him then, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Behind her, she heard him calling her name, but this time she didn't stop. This time she kept walking, even as her heart shattered with every step. The roses in the garden were finally dead, their petals scattered like tears across the ground. Elena drove toward Florence through the gathering darkness, knowing she was free but feeling more trapped than ever. Because the cruelest trap of all was the one your own heart built around itself. Elena spent 2 months in Florence, living in a tiny apartment above a flower shop where the scent of fresh blooms couldn't quite mask the ache in her chest. Every morning she woke hoping the pain would be less, that she could forget the feel of Dante's hands on her skin or the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Instead, the longing grew stronger, a constant reminder that some addictions never fade. The call came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening. Marco, Dante's assistant, his usually composed voice cracking with panic. "Mrs. Blackwood, you need to come home. Now." "I'm not Mrs. Blackwood anymore," Elena said, though the name still fit her like a second skin. "Please. He's dying." The world stopped spinning. "What?" "A car accident. The doctors say internal bleeding, possible brain trauma. He's been unconscious for 3 days, and the hospital needs family consent for emergency surgery. You're still legally his wife." Elena's hand found her mother's locket, gripping it like an anchor. "I'll be there in an hour." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Elena found Dante in the ICU, machines breathing for him while monitors traced the fragile rhythm of his failing heart. His face was pale as marble, purple bruises blooming across his sharp cheekbones like wilted roses. Victoria was there, her emerald dress an obscene splash of color against the clinical white. She looked up when Elena entered, her smile sharp as a blade. How touching. The little wife returns to watch her husband die. Get out, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying more authority than she knew she possessed. I have every right to be here. We've been together for 5 years. You were just a business arrangement. Elena stepped closer, her green eyes blazing. And yet I'm the one whose name is on his emergency contact form. I'm the one he married. I'm the one he chose. Something flickered in Victoria's perfectly composed face, a crack in her porcelain mask. He never loved you. It was always me. Then why did he end it? Elena asked softly. Because he did, didn't he? That photograph you sent me was the last time you were together. Your desperate attempt to destroy what he'd found with me. Victoria's face crumpled, revealing the bitter truth beneath her elegant lies. He said he couldn't do it anymore. That he'd found something real with you, something worth changing for. But I knew it wouldn't last. Men like Dante always return to what they know. You're wrong, Elena said, moving to Dante's bedside. He was already changing. I just wasn't brave enough to believe it. Victoria left without another word, her heels clicking against linoleum like a retreat. Elena was alone with the man who'd stolen her heart and broken it in the same breath. She took his hand, startled by how cold his fingers were. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Elena paced the waiting room like a caged animal, her mother's locket wearing a groove against her palm. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face was carefully neutral. The internal bleeding has stopped, but there was significant trauma to the brain. He's stable, but we won't know about permanent damage until he wakes up. If he wakes up. Elena nodded, her throat too tight for words. She returned to Dante's room and settled into the chair beside his bed, preparing for the longest vigil of her life. She talked to him for 3 days straight, reading him poetry and sharing memories of their brief happiness together. She told him about the roses she'd planted outside her Florence apartment, how they bloomed bright red like hope against the gray stone walls. On the 4th day, his fingers twitched in her grasp. Dante? She leaned closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. His eyes opened slowly, midnight blue and confused. He blinked several times before focusing on her face, and when recognition dawned, tears spilled down his cheeks. Elena. Her name was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. You came back. Of course I came back. She pressed his hand to her cheek, unable to stop her own tears. Did you really think I wouldn't? I thought you hated me. The photograph, Victoria's games, I thought I'd lost you forever. Elena studied his face, seeing past the physical damage to the raw vulnerability beneath. This wasn't the coldly controlled man she'd married, but someone stripped bare by pain and near death. I never hated you, she admitted. I hated that I loved you despite everything. I hated that you made me hope for something real when I thought you were still playing games. Dante struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. No games. Not anymore. I ended things with Victoria the day after we made love for the first time. That photograph was her goodbye gift, taken from an old encounter. I should have told you, should have been honest about my past instead of hiding from it. Why didn't you? Because I was terrified you'd leave me the way Isabel did. Because I thought if I could just be perfect enough, controlled enough, you might actually stay. His voice broke. I never learned how to love someone without destroying them. Elena touched his face gently, feeling the rough stubble and the warmth that meant life. Love isn't about being perfect, Dante. It's about being brave enough to be broken in front of someone and trusting them not to cut you with the pieces. He caught her hand, pressing it against his heart where she could feel the strong, steady rhythm. I want to try again. Not because of contracts or debts or business arrangements. Because I love you, Elena Blackwood, and I want to spend whatever time I have left proving it. Elena looked at this man who'd been her destroyer and her salvation, who taught her that love could be both poison and antidote. The smart thing would be to walk away, to protect herself from future heartbreak. Instead, she leaned down and kissed him, pouring 3 months of longing and heartache into the tender contact. Then prove it, she whispered against his lips. We'll build something real this time. No contracts, no games, no ghosts. Just us. They were married again 6 months later, in a small ceremony in the mansion's rose garden where Elena had planted new bushes that bloomed bright red against the Tuscan sky. Dante walked with a slight limp now, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything, but his smile was genuine as he slipped a new ring onto her finger. Until death do us part, he said, and this time he meant it. And beyond, Elena replied, touching her mother's locket one last time before tucking it away. Her mother's dreams had finally found their home. As they danced under the stars that night, surrounded by the scent of blooming roses and new beginnings, Elena realized that some fairy tales began with bargains and ended with choice. Some princes wore devils' faces until love taught them to be human. And sometimes, if you were very brave and very lucky, you could save each other from the ghosts that haunted your hearts. The wilted roses were finally gone, replaced by something stronger, something that would bloom forever. The end.